Good afternoon. This is Drew Perkins with the Collaborative for Teaching and Learning here in Louisville, and I am honored to be joined by a guest that I learned of from Kentucky Ed Chat on Twitter. Her name is Sherri Powers. She is a teacher at Stewart Pepper Middle School in Meade County, which is technically part of the related arts, tech arts. We're going to talk today about her authentic use of ILPs and career cruising in her class, and how she embeds that work in a more authentic way than perhaps doing sort of a checklist or crossing it off, going in the cafeteria, the old school style, but really connecting it to student work and in a way that's a bit more authentic. So, Sherri, I'm glad to have you here, and I'm going to give you a chance to introduce yourself and tell a little bit about yourself and your background before we get going on what it is that you're doing with ILPs.
Great, thanks, Drew. I'm glad to be with you finally and to talk about this. I started my career in Arizona and have taught since, I hate to even say the number, about 1990. I've always been at the middle school level except for a few years with elementary. I've served as a classroom teacher and a library media specialist. So I brought those things to bear on the subject area that I was asked to start teaching about 5 years ago, in connection, as you said, with our related arts class. And we refer to it in Meade County as our Encore group. It includes PE and health and art at the 8th grade level. And we teach about 400 kids. We're the only middle school in Meade County. And our 8th graders rotate between myself, our PE and health teachers, and our art teacher for 12 weeks. So they change classes 3 times a year. So I teach all the 8th graders in our building for 12 weeks. During that 12 weeks, we've always, at least as far as my memory serves, being at Stewart Pepper Middle School, even when I taught social studies, the kids were rotated into the computer lab and asked to complete their ILP within probably, I'd say, the last decade or so they've done that. And in our district, they do that since 6th grade. So by the time they get to me, and I've been asked to take over the completion of the ILP, their eyes do more than the traditional rolling back in their heads. So it occurred to me, for my sanity and for theirs, that something had to give. So with collaboration with the kids and helping teachers that we talk to on Twitter, including with Kentucky Ed Chat, we've tried to make some improvements, and it's an ongoing process. And to be honest with you, in addition to my coworkers and people I meet online to facilitate and give me ideas, my best resource has really been my students, and tapping into their interest and what matters to them, especially for these 8th graders as they think about going to high school.
Yeah, I remember, speaking of being a social studies teacher, so I was a social studies teacher for several years, well, 2001 to about 10 years or so at Shelby County High School, and going back even further than the last 5 or 10 years of pulling kids into the cafeteria and pulling out folders and checking them off, and the kids thinking, why are we doing this? And you say, well, you know, this is preparation, this is what you're going to do in life, and you know, sort of get you thinking about that, but it often, that checklist went back into the folder, was never to be seen again until next year. So the connection for kids to really using it as a tool, I think, is absolutely where it needs to go, and that's a real challenge. And so I'm going to give you a chance to Sherri's got a screen or a PowerPoint, some slides to share. I'm going to ask her to share that and kind of take us through the process, what she does and how she does it, so we can kind of get a sense of what it looks like and what that journey is like. So looks like you've got the full screen on now. There we go.
Yeah, we're getting there.
So you can see,
I've kind of gotten out of the habit of doing presentations like this since I'm project-based, so you'll bear with me. Here's the particulars that Drew was gracious enough to share with you at the beginning about myself and where I teach. And as I said, without the kids and the students and the support of my administration there, none of this would be possible. I think it's kind of always good with the kids. It seems like as we've worked over the last few years to kind of alter the ILP and the experience of completing their ILP for the third year since they started 6th grade. And they don't really know it when I have this lesson, but when they enter my classroom on day 1 of their 12-week rotation, we're almost constantly looking at infographics. That's part of an overreaching goal that I have for my kids to be more digital literate, because they're consumers from a very early age of all things online, and they don't really realize how good they are at it, and then to get them to start to create something like this. So ultimately, I know as we're discussing and even current events that come up, I know with the anniversary of the Boston bombing and the Boston Marathon, when that happened, the Wall Street Journal had a great infographic about that. So even from current events to my subject matter, infographics are a constant present in my classroom, because I know I want the kids to create content like this and do it more in a web visual manner than the traditional PowerPoints and other writing assignments that they've kind of been conditioned to do in their first 8 years in school. So this is just an example of an early infographic that I show them to kind of help them start figuring out what is an infographic. And then ultimately, as part of our ILP and career cruising, the unit we call Future Me, they're going to make an infographic. I tell them on the first day of our ILP unit that it's all about them. And if you've never taught middle school, that's that's something they can relate to.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So that's a good hook, but you know that's just kind of the appetizer to get them considering what the possibilities are. And ultimately, most kids will make a series of these infographics to show what they've learned and what they're dreaming of and what they're looking forward to high school and beyond. Daniel Pink, I'm sure you and your audience are well aware, has done some great work kind of getting everyone, especially us in education, to start thinking about learning and motivation differently. So this is something else that we do early on in our ILP and career cruising the Future Me unit, to kind of get the kids looking more big picture. Because as you said earlier, and I alluded to as well, since 6th grade it's been a checklist. In fact, my first experience was my class was used instead of the computer lab. The guidance counselor came in and completed the ILP with them online, checked this, answered these questions, 2 days done. And it was meaningless to the kids for the most part. So taking a step back and getting them to think of the big picture and what's important to them. I always like to relate to the kids that when I was their age, a long time ago, this little lesson might have been called, "What do you want on your tombstone?" So in addition to relating it to themselves and your future me, they like that, but they also have a preoccupation with all things gory. So we're talking about what you want on your tombstone. The middle schoolers are all in. So it's a concept they can relate to. Daniel Pink puts a little more positive spin on it, and if you haven't seen this video on YouTube that he's put together, it's worth your time. He also has one to go on with it where people from all over the world share their sentence. Funny, meaningful, silly, and to show the kids that after they've seen this introductory video, it just really kind of gets them thinking, and it gives us a good launching point for our unit.
So it's a nice cognitive or a sort of an emotional hook for them, gets them thinking about sort of a problem that they might solve, gets them invested, gives them some context, sort of if we want to use a buzzword, schema. So looking at the slide there, it says the 2 questions. What are the 2 questions?
That can change your life?
Yeah.
I'm afraid you were going to ask me that, but I think the 2 questions that can change your life are, what's your sentence, and did you get better today? So he takes it to an overarching goal of what's most important to you in life. And the kids and I, because I know we're going to talk about careers and preparation in high school for what they want to do after high school, I try to drill down with them to getting to whether it's to help people, for example, and maybe nursing or something like that's going to be their calling. You know, we eventually talk about money and all those other things that make the world tick, but this is kind of the nexus, if you will, and the genesis of where we launch from. And it helps kids to realize, because as I often say to them, I know it's difficult to get you all to think past lunch sometimes. But it gives them a context to think about, well, what is most important to me? And for some of our kids that we know haven't maybe had the best of circumstances up until this point, it gives them a chance to think how things could be better or different.
Well, I really like that line of thinking. You know, one of the things in a project-based learning setting that when I work with teachers around project-based learning is providing that context, like you said. So, you know, how do we teach the content that we're trying to teach in a context that is meaningful and really does engage in interest or empower them to do something with it? You know, it's kind of like the weight that they're thinking. The content is the weight that they're lifting. But if we can place it in a context like this that means something to them, then it does tend to, it doesn't always, it's not a magic bullet, but it does tend to lead to increased engagement, and it's almost like you're tricking kids into it. You're certainly not doing that, but it's like, you know, if you just present it as content, it certainly doesn't often engage them in the way that we want them to.
Yeah.
You mentioned,
especially after you've had kids in the system, so to speak, for, you know, they're into their middle school years, and basically they have 4 years of a free and public education left to them.
Mm-hmm.
Some of them feel very, I don't want to say downtrodden, but disconnected. You know, what's this all about? Where am I going? How's this going to help me in the future? And that's what I saw when I saw the ILP being delivered in a checklist format, as you said. So we're not there. I mean, this is definitely a work in progress. But I know just from people who've been around since it was a checklist, they've commented on how much more engaged and interested the kids are. Not all of them, but, you know, we're getting more and more each time. So that's what we're striving for.
Yeah, I'm going to share, if you don't mind, I'm going to share on this. This is a graphic that sometimes I share with teachers, especially when I'm doing PBL. We talk about engagement, and it really kind of gets at what you're talking about, that sort of shift from, I mean, elementary school students tend to be, you know, people pleasers, and they really do. They're excited about school, and then here in the middle school, you can see they're starting to really turn off and say, you know, what am I doing and why am I here? To high school, where sometimes they're even angry that we're asking them to do that.
Yeah.
And, you know, you had sort of hit on it before, that when I walk into a classroom, or anybody walks into a classroom, if you were to say, okay, why are you doing this? Why are you doing this work? And, you know, generally it's one of three answers. One, it's going to be in a test. Two, teacher says I'm supposed to. Or three, I'm going to need this in the future. And ILP content is absolutely that third one. Mm-hmm. But as you said, I mean, high school students, middle school students, you know, Friday is the future for them. So to couch it again in that context that does make sense and is meaningful to them, I think is absolutely essential here.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think they appreciate it. I don't know that if you talk to 10 of my students and ask them, that they could verbalize that, but you can really tell it in their finished products, and just the discussions that you overhear in my room or in the lunchroom or in the hallway, or when the kids leave the room talking about high school and whether they're going to take AP classes, or if they want to go straight to work, or if they want to do some type of education, but they don't think a four-year college is for them. because a lot of these kids grow up in circumstances where that's not your normal dinner time conversation. And if we can start helping kids have those conversations, I would consider my job well done if I just stopped there. So
Yeah.
that's encouraging. Now, my class is officially called Tech Ed, so I try to embed different tools into the learning, and I always like to give kids choices. So, they become familiar and are familiar with a lot of apps and programs and websites before they ever come to my room. I make a concerted effort to introduce Google Drive to them in a full-blown fashion. If nothing else, I think it goes along well, especially with this unit in the ILP and career cruising, because a lot of high schools are going to use it, and even more higher post-secondary schools. So I think it's a good experience for them. So I thought I'd share with you one of the apps that we use is Google Drawing, because kids pretty quickly pick up on, oh, this is the ILP thing, oh, this is career cruising, like you said earlier, trying to trick them. They're not easily tricked, so they gather that pretty quickly. And it's like, oh, yeah, well, what do you want us to be when we grow up? So we, of course, start with that question and validate that, yes, in fact, that's what we're doing. But then we try to lead that into another discussion and start asking those other questions that I alluded to earlier. Maybe including, after you figure out what you love to do as part of the Daniel Pink exercise, is anybody going to pay you to do it? Because we all read those stories about people who spend a lot of money for education but don't get a job working in the field that they have a degree in. So I tell them we try to marry the heart with the mind. It doesn't always work. It's not 100% foolproof possibility, but that's the idea. And since we're just planning here and thinking about the future, why not shoot for the idea? So I try to get them to look at both sides of the coin there, so to speak, and then to start thinking about the practical steps that might make that happen. What do I need to take in high school? What types of extracurriculars do I need to participate in? How do I start building a resume? What is a resume? Because, as I mentioned earlier, for some kids, this is the first time these questions have ever been said to them. And we also discussed how in a small community like Brandenburg and Meade County, we all basically know the same people, and that there are very few different types of jobs among those people. So there are so many jobs we haven't heard of that these kids have no idea exist, that they may be perfect for them. They also need an appreciation for the statistics that you and I and other educators know, that maybe as much as 50% of the jobs they'll hold don't even exist today. And I like to use the example of just a decade or two ago, all the web jobs that no one ever heard of. Website designer, for example. If I had been filling out my ILP like they are 20 years ago, that wouldn't have even been on the radar. So we talk about the possibilities there. And they do all this brainstorming in an app of their choice, but a lot of kids will use Google Drawing. And we've probably spent, from a timing standpoint, I know that's important for everybody who's trying to stay in their scope and sequence, so to speak. 2 or 3 days introducing and kind of thinking and brainstorming and working together before we even visit the actual career cruising site. So it's all been a lead up, whereas 5 years ago that would have been the first place they'd gone and almost instantly turned off probably.
I like that. Not to interrupt you, I'm sorry, but there's two things that strike me of what you're saying. One is, and I recently did a hangout with a friend of mine, Jill Akers, who started a PBL elementary school, and one of the things that she's done and really been intentional about is kind of what you're saying, is sort of giving them a chance to do some research and work on the issue on that context before they dive into the actual project or something, whatever we're calling this. The other thing that I liked is sort of sounds like you have them sort of uncovering that content and asking those questions. If you go back, I'm gonna make your screen. If you mind going back one slide there. Yeah, so essentially you've got a what we call a compelling question. So what do you want to be when you grow up? And getting kids to say, well, what are the things we need to know, and developing that inquiry list of things that they need to know, instead of, as a teacher, what we tend to do in sort of more traditional setting is tell them what they need to know and start with that, kind of like what you said, just go straight to the career cruising site. But giving them a chance to do this process, this inquiry process, I think is a really important piece of that inquiry. So
yeah, and it never fails that a kid, at least once a trimester, if not once a class period, comes up with a question or a concept or something to consider that I had never thought of.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, as hip and cool as I like to think I am, and my daughters constantly remind me that I'm not. You know, these kids are in the trenches, as I tell them, and I'm far from the one who should be worried about my future. I said I'm worried about retirement, but I'm not worried about my future. So these are questions that you all need to come up with.
Right.
And to be honest with you, it wasn't so much that's just kind of been something that I've learned after the fact. It was more of a preservation for me. Because the kids are so much better at it. I'm no matter how I like to break out of the mold and I like to think in new different ways, I'm not of their generation. I don't have the same concerns. I don't have the same mindset. So when I tried to come up with questions, and I did that, just exactly what you just described, it was a failure for most of the kids. Go ahead.
That process and that skill for kids is such an important one, and that sense of inquiry and getting them to be able to do the sort of the Socratic seminar style. And I'm imagining the things that they, in a PBL setting, the things that they come up with as those questions they need to ask, pretty much, or I would guess, pretty closely aligned to the content that you're going to teach anyway. There's probably some things, again, that they hadn't, that they think of that you hadn't thought of that aren't necessarily content, but what a rich way to get them to basically identify the content that you're going to teach.
Correct. And it's amazing how much continuity and how it touches what I need it to touch. I mean, do we have to kind of circumvent sometimes and back up and say, well, let's look at it this way? Sure. But not very often. So that's been really a nice reward for me as a teacher. When we get into career cruising, because you know that we aren't abandoning it, we aren't not doing the ILPs. It's just a matter of the context that it's set up in. But it seems, at least watching them do career cruising before these exercises and setups that I've started doing in the last couple of years, just my anecdotal observations is that it seems more meaningful to them. They take their time, they ask more questions, they do more research, they interact with each other more, and I don't even mention the R word, research, until much further down the road. You know, I'll use the word investigate, discover, ask questions, and then, you know, one day I'll just kind of blithely say or post that, oh, this seems a lot like research. And they're like, what? So, and they like that. It makes them feel, you know, like, wow, I've been able to do this all along. And I think it really helps their confidence.
Well, it's funny you say that. In our PBL model here at CTL, we have what we call academic literacy, so reading, writing, speaking, and listening as experts in that field. And essentially what you're doing is creating that setting for them where they're doing that research, whether they know it or not, but they're doing it as sort of an expert in that field might. I mean, when we as adults think about what is it that we want to do with our lives, some of us, you know, at this age still thinking about that, right? I mean, we're really having that conversation with ourselves, and it is research, but it's investigation, it's all of those things that you mentioned.
Right. My students don't see the slide that I'm showing you now until I give them the rubric for their product, which we call my future infographic, Future Me. But I went ahead and put it here at this point in our talk to kind of go along with the previous screen about career cruising and the ILP. Because if you're using the ILP and the career cruising website, everything that the kids are required to complete to get your completion status for the state generally falls into these three categories very easily. So the product that the kids need to make, from my perspective, for themselves and to make this more authentic, naturally goes along with what we're being asked to do from the ILP completion status. There are some great resources that I didn't create, I just use and borrow that go along with the ILP. They have projects, they have assignments, and it's all part of the teacher resources when we log in as a teacher to the Career Cruising ILP website. And I don't want to give the impression that because of the things that we've started doing with the completion of the ILP at my school that it's in any way an inferior product. Quite the contrary. I think it was just figuring out how to set the stage and then avail myself to the resources. You know, starting with the training that the state provides, and then they send out, I want to say it's a monthly email and online webinars and sharing these resources. And we both know from working and subscribing to Twitter quite a bit that when you can pull these people who are working on the same stuff and share ideas, it just benefits everybody all the way around. This is a student sample. As I showed you on the previous slide, the kids are responsible for making at least 3, what we refer to as infographics. One for their high school career, one for what's going to happen immediately after high school, and then the distant future, what I say, when you're old like me, for example. And this is just an example of the secondary one. This is a student who was imagining and planning about what they would do right after high school. And one of the things the ILP asks us to create is to look and select some colleges or post-secondary schools that you're interested in. And in fact, some of the data that you see on this example is straight out of the career cruising and ILP section for the student.
I'm going to have to, I told you before when I saw this, I'm going to have to protest against that University of Michigan stuff there, being a Michigan State grad, but I'll let it slide.
Yeah, I left that in there just for you. All right. I put Kentucky in it, and my alma mater's there too as well, so shout out to the Center Colonels there.
All right.
One thing that I wanted to be sure to work in with you during our visit today is my more recent addition to help me and the kids with ILP and career cruising are Edmodo groups. We use Edmodo groups during our 12 weeks together for lots of things. In fact, I just got a new group of kids about 3 weeks ago that I'll finish up the year with, and they're working on some digital citizenship stuff right now, and their Edmodo grouping is completely random. We'll have, and they work with kids who aren't in their class period with them. So it's distance learning, sort of, and requires them to learn to communicate and collaborate with someone who's not sitting right beside them, which they don't get a lot of practice doing. But back to our topic in career cruising and the ILP, instead of the Edmodo groups being completely random, the kids, and they've always done this since 6th or 7th grade, they identify a career cluster that Kentucky has identified. And based on that career cluster, I have Edmodo groups set up corresponding to each career cluster. And then I just display a list of codes from Edmodo. I think it's 14 identified career clusters in Kentucky. And whichever career cluster, they're welcome to choose more than one, that they most readily identify at this point in our unit, they join. So between my 5 classes each trimester, we have an average of about 5 kids in each group, probably. And then They get to bounce ideas off of each other. They can collaborate on their drawings, on their infographics. And it's also a good way for them, if they have an interest in health sciences, for example. They may not be interested in the exact same career, but it's another way to maybe consider an option or training or paying for education that they haven't heard of, that they can hear of from a fellow student. Because when you're teaching 150 kids and you're trying to help each one of them identify a path for their future, there's almost always someone who's going to be missed. So since I started using the Edmodo groups, I found that that collaboration piece and working together has been worth its weight in gold. And in fact, the kids work on this outside of class. It's that typical thing that you like to hear and think about, that your kids are learning because they want to, not because they have to. And the Edmodo groups have really facilitated that. And I'm sure Edmodo is not the only way you can do that. If you have another learning management system like Schoology or something, Google Groups, if that's open in your school, would probably be a way to do it as well.
Right.
And I think I've pretty much covered everything else that's on this slide. This unit obviously lends itself to a lot of the digital literacy stuff that I need and want to cover, including, and I just pulled out this one because sometimes people wonder, how do I work that in? Obviously, they're pulling graphics and images and data from KY ILP and Career Cruising, and a lot of them from all over the web. So we spend a lot of time talking about Creative Commons and how to cite their work and all that good stuff too.
You've got some really great examples of, and I'm sure you're familiar with. I'm going to share it here as a screen share. The ISTE nets, and I'm going to pull up the ISTE nets standards for students. For those of you who are not familiar with ISTE nets. ISTE is probably, in my opinion, the best organization out there advancing, like it says here, digital age learning and technology. INECL is pretty good too, but ISTE has done a really nice job of sort of outlining. This is the student version. There's also a teacher version, a coach's version, an administrator's version. This one for the students has six areas that we try to get. We really, as ideals, what we want students to do. And I love that the first four are things that really are not, unless you look at the sort of the subheadings here, are really not particularly related to technology at all. I mean, we don't necessarily need technology to do creativity and innovation, to communicate and collaborate, research and those things. Now, scrolling down here to number 5 and 6, what you've mentioned there, that digital citizenship, and then the technology operations and concepts, clearly is technology based, but I think what you've got there are clear examples of allowing students to create and innovate. And in 6th grade, that looks, that's not always terribly sophisticated, but it's still on a sort of a sliding scale for them. Certainly that communication and collaboration, and Edmodo is a great way to do it. My Big Campus or Schoology, as you mentioned, is the Google Docs and Google Groups and places. Hopefully Kentucky will open that up and make that an option for more kids as we go along, and Google Apps for Education gets a little more widespread. You're clearly giving them an opportunity to research and become fluent in information and think critically and sort of problem solve. So I'm a big fan of these ISTE nets, and certainly I like how you've addressed those.
Yeah, the ISTE nets have been part of my Bible doctrine lesson plan book since I took over this job 5 years ago. I don't know where I'd be without them. So I agree 100%.
Yeah. So do they? My question, one question I have is, with the infographics, what sort of authentic audience and what do they present those to anybody, or have you sort of been working on that as a plan?
Yeah, that's the it was kind of the genesis of this whole thing, and it's part of our ongoing improvement because it's still not good. Um, Originally, when the ILPs started to be complete, we had a grant for something called Power Pack, and we invited parents in usually around March to the middle school. And it's really the kids. It's for the kids. It's the night that they turn in their high school schedule. But we wanted it to be more than that. So the high school brings over clubs and athletics, and they fill the commons area to give out information. The guidance counselors from the high school are there to talk to the parents, and then each of the kids meets with their parent or guardian with one of the members of the faculty. So the 7th and 8th grade teachers all have about 9 kids, 9 8th graders that they meet with. The principals, the librarian, we bring in central office personnel, whoever we can get. And we're officially their advisor for their ILP. And we currently, most recently, have a folder that's full of their Explorer test scores, information about paying for post-secondary education, just trying to get parents on board with this conversation that I've started with their kids at school. Because any parent knows that when your kid comes home and you ask them what they did at school today, the answer is nothing.
Nothing.
The same thing happens when we're talking about their future. Maybe you have a few kids that go home and talk about it, but not very many. So the Power Pack night, as we still call it, is about getting the community involved. It's not perfect, but it's better than keeping our fingers crossed and hoping that the kids will go home and talk about it. So what we've done is, and this kind of kills me to say, but we print out their ILP and we print their infographic. Now, the printing part is, I would like to obviously make it more 21st century and paperless, but we're not there yet. And the other issue is that, like I said, I just got this third group of kids a few weeks ago. So when we had Power Pack, a third of the kids' ILP was blank, except for what they've done in 6th and 7th grade, and they hadn't created their infographic yet. So it's not a perfect system, but we're working on it. So the audience is their parents. They're gonna see their ILP and their infographic. And I'm not sure that's the best audience, but that's the one we got so far. So it's still a work in progress.
Yeah, as I work with teachers on PBL, that authentic audience is often one of the things that comes along a little bit later in the game, because it is sometimes a difficult match to make. Thinking about who they might present to that might use that information, give them feedback on that information, whether that's folks in the community, and Meade County is absolutely beautiful country. I remember as a golf coach spending some time there at Doe Valley, usually in the woods, but
as most people do.
Yeah, it is remote.
Yeah.
And as is much of Kentucky, many of our schools in Kentucky, so the access to folks in the community that do some of the things that you'd like to connect them with, and we call it digital thinking here, and sort of leveraging those resources, and so my mind automatically goes to finding groups on the internet and using Google Hangouts or Skype or Link or things like that. That task and purpose of an audience really does help sort of guide and focus qualitatively the work that students do.
Yeah, and I think if sitting here talking to you and thinking about it, that those Edmodo groups, if you ask the kids, they would probably mention somebody in their group seeing their infographic. I don't even know that they realize that in my mind it's for that Power Pack night and for their parents and for that folder that they're taking home. So, and they're all about the peers. So that to me is something I want to continue to develop and see if we can even get it to a broader audience and not just the kids who are currently in my tech ed class.
Is there, they continue the ILP process in high school and often become less engaged or more disengaged. Is there a connection that you've built or looking to do, or if you were doing it in high school, would you do some things or add some things that the level of sophistication might allow, or the proximity to them becoming adults, that kind of thing?
I think the thing that would interest me if I was at the high school level or if someone at Meade County High School asked me about it is the component of a mentor or someone from the career cluster. I think it would be hard to get somebody from every career, but get someone who represents career cluster. And this is something in my mind, it's on my list of things to do is Skyping in speakers like that or having guest speakers in the classroom. What I've wrestled with is having someone from the health sciences cluster talking to the kids, and only 5 of my kids are interested in health sciences. Not that it wouldn't be interesting to everyone else, but I think, these Google Hangouts, but those aren't open to us, where I could just have the kids who are interested in health sciences on that Google chat during that class period, and everybody else is doing something else if they didn't want to participate in it. So I'm wrangling with those kind of technical and legal issues to kind of facilitate. And I read recently, maybe on Twitter probably, it's like I get too much information probably. In eastern Kentucky, I saw a high school that was tweeting out some pictures where they had some people in different career fields in the high school, and may even been a middle school, meeting with different groups of students. So that, to me, is kind of the next logical step, I think.
Was it Lee County by any chance? Do you remember? Because
I don't remember.
somebody had shared with me, and I don't know enough about it, but had shared with me a school, I think it was Lee County, doing something like that. Excuse me. But yeah, I really appreciate your honesty and sort of forthrightness about this being a journey. I think it's important to note that as a culture, teachers often they're very hesitant to share their work like you've done here because they say, well, it's not perfect, or I'm going to be criticized, where in reality, the way that we get better and become more professional as a community is to share and talk about that work and doing things like this, doing things like critical friends protocols, that kind of thing. What you're describing really fits well with the PBL methodology that I work with teachers around, and again, that inquiry-based learning and engagement and tasks that are meaningful to them, I think, are absolutely essential. So I thank you so much for your willingness to share with the warts and all. And the other part of that is that we're all, it's really easy, and myself included, to say, well, we can't do that because we don't have we don't have the ability to show these infographics online, so why would we do it, or we don't have this technology, or we don't have that money. But finding ways to work around those to get at as much as possible. So if you have one iPad in your room, how do you leverage that one iPad,
right,
and work towards building to have 2 iPads or 10 iPads or 5 Chromebooks or whatever it is.
And I think too, what you've alluded to with the self-reflection, for me, I would know that when you asked me to visit with you about this, that was going to be part of what I did. But as I put together the slides and thought about what I might say and just the questions you've asked today, it's just made me think and reconsider. And I've got 20 ideas I want to add to it. And my last group of kids will be ready to roll with it here in just a few weeks. So it's been very beneficial for me, and I thank you for asking me.
Well, as we wrap up here, I encourage you all to connect with Sherri, S Powers KY at S Powers KY on Twitter, and again, if you're not on Twitter in Kentucky or elsewhere, Kentucky Ed Chat, hashtag KYEDCHAT, is an absolutely fantastic resource and great community of folks in Kentucky. There's all kinds of other chats. There's a library chat in Kentucky. There's an ed admin chat. So being able to engage with other teachers as a learning tool, whether it's Sherri, myself at D. Perkins MSU or whatever. That's how I met Sherri, was through Twitter. And when we, what was it, at an ed camp?
Yeah, Teach Meet and Bowling Green.
Teach Me, yeah.
I know
We connected, and when I finally heard her story, I thought, I've got to get this on the air because I think it's a great resource for teachers around the state, and there are other states that do similar types of things. So not only is the methodology important, but it's also connecting it to something that I think is sometimes often very, very tough to make authentic. Maybe because we've spent so much time with folders and checklists and that kind of thing. So any other parting shots or anything you'd like to add before we sign off?
Well, I'm sure I think of 15 things after you hang up, but I'm good, I think. Okay.
Well, if any of you out there have questions for Sherri or myself regarding this or around this, these videos will be on YouTube, and you can connect with us that way. And other than that, everybody have a great afternoon, and we'll sign off.